Part 90. While he hunts his lover's trace, his lover tries to escape from the evil man. Outside the city, several cars drove quickly in the direction of Fengshan Mountain, flying sand and rocks along the way. Bai Xuelan sat in one of the cars, full of anger. He didn't know why, but he always felt a sense of unease cutting his heart. Unspeakable sadness. He shouldn't have been so mad last night. He was drunk on purpose. If he didn't get drunk, he would naturally have a good conversation with Huaifeng when he got into the room at night. And he wouldn't fall asleep with his head covered. When he woke up, he realized that the situation had changed. It shouldn't be because of a surnamed Lin, making all these right and wrong. Yali Fan Restaurant? In addition to going to the customs office yesterday, Huaifeng only went to Nian's house. Needless to say, in the customs office, Bai Xuelan knew that Huaifeng went to see Adjutant's son. That's just Nian's house. What did Nian Liangfu and Huaifeng say in Nian's house? Who did you meet at Yali Fan Restaurant? Will not be Nian Liangfu. Bai Xuelan had already asked before going out. Nian Liangfu went to work at the office today. If this surnamed Nian hadn't been kept for a little use, it should have been dealt with long ago. But Bai Xuelan intuitively felt that he was not doing enough. Nian Liangfu recently got close to the Guangdong army. Why didn't he give Huaifeng some wind first? Huaifeng was defenseless. While frowning in thought, the car jolted and stopped halfway without warning. Bai Xuelan's eyes suddenly jumped, and he rolled down the car window and asked, "What's going on?" Everyone in the car in front jumped down, facing the road in front of them, and saw something extraordinary. Hearing Bai Xuelan's question, a guard with a gun hurried over and reported, "Chief, something happened ahead." As soon as the voice fell, another guard ran over. This one was older and had mature eyes. When he saw Bai Xuelan, he said in a deep voice, "Chief, it's the mansion's car. Someone buried explosives on the road." Bai Xuelan's head was buzzing. He got out of the car and held the door with his hands. His fingers were numb, as if the blood had frozen. Only this bone-deep freezing also froze all his fierce reactions. And in the eyes of outsiders, it seemed his calmness even more. He walked past a car in front of him and looked at the road ahead, and there was indeed a charred residue on the ground. He stepped forward calmly. His footsteps were not chaotic at all, and his eyes swept over. He saw a strangely shaped black hole on the ground. The car had been blown up into large and small pieces, mixed with blood-stained flesh and mud stumps. A front flag of the General Administration of Customs, half slanted among the fragments, occasionally fluttered against the wind, as if crying for something, but also sarcastically. Bai Xuelan's stomach twitched suddenly. He had seen a lot of such scenes in Shandong, and it could be said that he was used to it. He pressed his hand tightly to his stomach, squinting slightly. A few of his subordinates were afraid that he would not be able to bear it, so a few followed and asked worriedly, "Chief?" Bai Xuelan said softly, "This is not a Lincoln car. Where is the car of Adjutant Xuan? Find them separately." Forced, but the guards listened to him very much, and immediately dispersed. Bai Xuelan stood in front of the pile of gunpowder shards, facing the unpleasant wind, slowly looking around. He stiffened suddenly. On the edge of the piles of tall yellow stones in the northwest, there is a faint black edge. Bai Xuelan quickly moved a few steps, and the angle was turned a little bit, and he could see it clearly. It was a Lincoln car. Between the lightning and flint, the blood all over his body went from freezing to boiling, like a spring under his feet, and he rushed towards it like an explosion. After rushing for about 100 meters, the target in the field of vision became clearer. It was indeed the car that Xuan Huaifeng was sitting in. "Huaifeng!" Bai Xuelan shouted. He guessed that most of Xuan Huaifeng would not be in the car, but he couldn't help tearing his throat out and shouting. The scattered guards saw his movement and turned around and ran after him. Lincoln didn't know why it stopped here and left the road. The two doors were wide open. Not far from the car, the driver named Yu Sheng was lying on his back, his wide eyes filled with horror. And the blood on his body had already solidified. Bai Xuelan stopped in his footsteps, just glanced at it and recognized that it was a gunshot wound. The 3 bullets hit the driver's chest and abdomen, and he was already dead. He quickly turned his eyes away and found a dark shadow crawling in the back seat of the car. And he was surprised like a firework suddenly lit, and called out, "Huaifeng," and probed into the back seat. But the next moment he immediately turned his head back. Serenity, not the wind. It's a sleeping woman. Her body is covered with the unpleasant scent of powder. Fascinated. At this time, the guards who followed him ran out of breath. Someone shouted, "Yeah, Yuesheng is dead here." Bai Xuelan's eyes flashed with a frightening light, and he calmly took off the holster, put the pistol in his hand, and said in a deep voice, "Brothers, someone has set a trap for Adjutant Xuan. They used the drug and they wanted to catch him alive. Song Ren is an experienced veteran, so it may not be easy for them to succeed. Only forest can hide people here. Search for me in the forest and see. It's not your own, just shoot, don't keep one." Xuan Huaifeng ran furiously. His lungs were burning with pain, and the same was true of his left ankle, which was twitching and hurting sharply. It turned into a shallow rock pit when he was running away. But he didn't dare to slow down his steps, dragging his injured ankle, dodging step by step in the wild forest, fleeing. Men chasing him may appear everywhere. Bullets often landed on tree stumps behind him or beside him. But it may not be his luck to be able to avoid the bullets. Several times, he heard those people screaming, "Catch alive!" Zhan Luzhao's voice. "You want to live?" It was as if the underground demon king, hungry for thousands of years, growled bloodthirsty among the ferocious wild forests and bullets. Xuan Huaifeng didn't know when he had provoked that surnamed Zhan. It was ridiculous that he used to think that this surnamed Zhan was a good person. He really doesn't know anyone. Bai Xuelan is the visionary. The severe pain in his ankle suddenly pulled his thoughts back. Hearing the strange movement of his footsteps on the broken branches, Xuan Huaifeng stopped his steps and suddenly turned to the right shape. The footsteps were getting closer. Xuan Huaifeng pressed the back of his head against the tree trunk, closed his eyes and counted silently. His pounding heart suddenly shrank violently. Xuan Huaifeng's figure flashed behind the tree, raised his hand and fired a shuttle of bullets. But the shot went wrong, and the bullet rubbed the man's face. The man fell to the ground, and did not forget to continue shouting, "Here!" Xuan Huaifeng turned around and continued to run. The sound of chasing came from behind, and the sound of gunfire alarmed the enemy and attracted them all in this direction. Xuan Huaifeng opened his mouth to pant while running, and shook his head vigorously against the wind. He didn't know how far he could escape. Along the way he fired a lot of shots. "How many people have you beaten?" "There are always 10, right?" He didn't have the time to keep track of the numbers, but the bullets he fired were almost always in vain. But Xuan Huaifeng wasn't satisfied, because it wasn't a single shot. He was good at first, but the back of his head gradually became weak. When he wanted to hit his head, the bullet often landed on his shoulder, and the drug made his hand unstable. He used to think that killing people was a terrible thing, but now he has no time to think about the preciousness of human life. Maybe his father's ruthlessness that belongs to the warlord also exists in his blood. Now he just hoped that Browning's magazines were always full, because he didn't want to fall into the hands of this group of people. However, his feet hurt so much, and thanks to that pain, he was still awake. At least he didn't hit the tree in front of him while running wildly. Everything wobbled in the field of vision. Xuan Huaifeng felt that his head was unreasonably heavy, and strange tiredness was always intruding upon him. Once he stopped, he might just sit down and couldn't run anymore. Can't stop. Bai Xuelan's face appeared in his drowsy mind. It's Bai Xuelan. Bai Xuelan will definitely hold on to the end. Bai Xuelan, even if surrounded by an army, will definitely not give up. That man never gave up. Xuan Huaifeng bit his lower lip forcefully, forcing out the last bit of strength and speeding up his pace. This forest is really big. I can't help but wonder, does the river to the east really exist? Or did you remember it wrong when you came? Or in the wrong direction? With his mind full of confusion, he drove his legs like a machine, and said to himself like a curse, you want freedom and human rights in life and death. Now that freedom is freedom, it has caused a big mess. If you are really caught alive, what will Bai Xuelan think of you? Being looked down upon by Bai Xuelan was very ugly. As he ran out of breath, he was messy but resolutely thinking about the little things that really shouldn't be thought about at this time. Suddenly, a fresh voice came into my ears. Xuan Huaifeng heard it clearly in just a second. It's the sound of water. He was overjoyed and added 12 points of strength to run forward. As long as the drug is cured, as long as he has 2 brownings and bullets, then he has nothing to fear. How many people can they have? The big deal is there are 8 or 10. He was awake, with a gun in his hand, 1 to hit 1, 1 pair to 1 pair. His marksmanship was taught by Bai Xuelan himself. The sound of the water became clearer and clearer, and after passing around a few big trees, the field of vision suddenly widened. A small river, like a lady enjoying the sunshine. Serpentine flows past the edge of the forest. The water danced with golden sparkles. Xuan Huaifeng looked left and right, but found no figure, and rubbed his cat against the edge of the forest. He didn't dare to show his body too much, and squatted under a huge boulder. At this time, there is no time to take into account that the shoes and socks will be wet. He stepped into the shallow water with his feet below his knees, put the 2 brownings that had saved his life on the stone out of the water, lowered his head and splashed the water on his face. A strong force came from behind him, and it seemed that a hand was pushing heavily on his back, and his footing suddenly became unstable. And his center of gravity was planted in the middle of the river. Xuan Huaifeng's face was plunged into the water, his vision blurred for a while, he couldn't breathe. His hands clapped on the surface of the water and struggled, but the mysterious hand on his back kept pressing hard, preventing him from raising his head. A throbbing pain came from the top of the head. It was as if someone grabbed his hair, pulled him into the depths of the water, and poured it under his head. Although Xuan Huaifeng grew up in Guangdong, where there are many rivers, his water quality is very poor. He was pushed and pressed, pulled and pressed, gulu drank a lot of water, dizzy. Couldn't tell the difference between east, west, north and west, and his hands were messed up. Scratching, as if he grabbed the assailant's body, it caused the opponent's hand to loosen up. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Xuan Huaifeng put his neck out of the water with all his might, and took a breath, but found that his feet could not touch the bottom of the river. And it seemed like a bottomless abyss underwater. At this time, the mysterious and sinful hand had disappeared, and only he was struggling to rise and fall in the terrifying water. He stretched his limbs as hard as he could, hoping to catch something, but there was only endless water around him. He wants air. Even a little is fine. The red-hot charcoal was simmering in his lungs, bit by bit, scorching him more and more palpitatingly, driving him crazy. He scratched in the air like a twitch of his fingers, feeling his strength being pulled from him. Dying despair overtook him. Xuan Huaifeng thought of Bai Xuelan desperately. He doesn't want to die. A person. If there is a person in the world who loves him very much, and he loves him very much, he will never be willing to die. If he dies, who will Bai Xuelan pick the mulberries for? Bai Xuelan was drunk. Who did he jump out of the window and who to cheat? Xuan Huaifeng's persistent desire to survive surged up in his chest. He took a desperate breath, but water poured into his nose and trachea. But just at this critical moment, the wave above the head shook violently, and someone jumped into the water. Bai Xuelan! Xuan Huaifeng shouted fiercely in his heart. The man swam to Xuan Huaifeng's side, and Xuan Huaifeng hugged him without hesitation. Even though he was about to faint, he still used the little energy left to hug his lover. The two of them rose up from the bottom of the water. Soon, Xuan Huaifeng felt that the soles of his feet touched the soft bottom of the river, and they probably swam to a shallow place. Xuan Huaifeng was beaten and hugged to the shore. The ground on the bank is also soft, and there is faintly clear river water blown by the wind. With a touch, Xuan Huaifeng is lying on his back on the bank soaked by the shallow and clear river water. He opened his eyes slightly, and the strong sunlight above his head made him immediately close them again. A hand touched his chest and abdomen and pressed down. Xuan Huaifeng coughed, turned over suddenly, and spat out a few mouthfuls of water. Breathing with head down, those hands caressed his back and asked, "Is it better?" Hearing that voice, Xuan Huaifeng suddenly stiffened. As soon as he raised his head, he met Zan Luzhao's smiling gaze. Put his hands on the ground and stepped back. Zan Luzhao was condescending and had the upper hand early on. He pressed his hand on his chin and asked, "Why did you fall into the water?" "It's a good thing I took a step earlier, otherwise, I might not be able to save you." Xuan Huaifeng shook his head, turned over to flee, but his ankle suddenly tightened and someone grabbed him. It was the injured left ankle, which made Zan Luzhao scratch so rudely. And Xuan Huaifeng let out a muffled groan. Zan Luzhao asked, "Does it hurt? You are so delicate." Then he released his 5 fingers and slowly caressed his ankles through the wet white socks. Xuan Huaifeng was horrified and said coldly, "Zan Luzhao, I'm a government official. If an accident happens, the Guangdong army can't afford it. If you are sensible, let me go. I won't tell anyone about today's affairs." Zan Luzhao smiled and said, "Don't say that you are from the government, even if you are from heaven. I will not let you go." This smile was very frightening. Xuan Huaifeng asked, "What do you want to do?" Zan Luzhao said, "You are still as good looking as before." After speaking, he stretched out his arms and hugged Xuan Huaifeng. Xuan Huaifeng pressed his hand against his chest and pushed it hard, but he was squeezed even tighter. Just as he was about to speak, he opened his lips when a man's unfamiliar aura suddenly appeared on his lips, soft and hard tongue slyly squeezed in. Knowing that Zan Luzhao was kissing him forcibly, Xuan Huaifeng became dizzy, gritted his teeth and refused to let his tongue in. He was fighting, but his chin was held by the man, 2 fingers were pressed against the upper and lower jaws, and he gently pinched. The pain struck, and he couldn't help but open his mouth. Zan Luzhao's tongue took advantage of the situation and licked the body fluid wantonly. It was indeed imagined, so sweet and clear. Even the newly grown peaches in the Queen Mother's orchard can't compare. He pondered that this delicate and seductive deep body fluid could prolong his life. So he demanded it with even greater effort, searching for the escaped tongue to bite. Xuan Huaifeng let out an annoyed messy snort and hummed. This sound is also unprecedented. Zan Luzhao originally planned to take him back to his car and talk about it when he got there, but now he can't care about it anymore. Xuan Huaifeng sowed a fire on him. And now these fires are burning regardless of the reason, and the river is pouring continuously. He was hot all over, and his legs were high and straight, and there was a dull pain. He kissed Xuan Huaifeng fiercely for a while, and felt more and more that it was not enough, and pressed Xuan Huaifeng to the ground. With a snort, he tore off most of Xuan Huaifeng's white shirt. The slightly undulating white jade-like chest was exposed in the sunlight, as if a halo had been printed on it, which made him startled as if shocked, and stretched out his hand to caress greedily. Xuan Huaifeng struggled like a fish caught ashore, but the man pressed his shoulder so hard that he couldn't even turn over to avoid it. An unpleasant touch came from his chest. The humiliation of being fondled as a display caused goosebumps on the skin. Xuan Huaifeng blushed and shouted, "Stop." This backfired. Not only didn't work, but made Zhan Luzhao's crotch suddenly harder. Zhan Luzhao had a wolf-like gleam in his eyes and wanted to choose someone to devour him. He asked him, "If the surnamed Pai touches you, do you want him to stop too?" Xuan Huaifeng, in wet clothes, was crawling and rolling on the ground. With dust and mud, it has long been abnormally embarrassed. But this embarrassment made his facial features more delicate. The wet short hair was stuck to the forehead, the straight nose bridge was indescribably arrogant. And the heroic black eyes were like two suns shrunk and hidden inside. The torn shirt oozes the scent of jade, which directly leads people to evil thoughts. Zhan Luzhao lowered his head, pressed his lips against his tender white chest, and kissed him recklessly. Xuan Huaifeng had never suffered such an insult in his life, even if he had suffered it under Bai Xuelan's hands. The taste was very different at this moment. He was very good at marksmanship, but he had never learned boxing and kung fu, and he was entangled with Zhan Luzhao. "I can't wait to grit my teeth." Right back, he raised his head and gasped for breath, and suddenly saw a pair of feet approaching, and he looked up, but it was his third brother. Xuan Huaifeng shouted, "Third brother! Third brother! Help me!" He rolled his waist and tried to get up. Xuan Huaifeng came over and helped push Zhan Luzhao away from him. Zhan Luzhao was thwarted by others, so he jumped up in anger and slapped Xuan Huaifeng to the side, scolding, "Person bringing bad luck. This time, I will ruin this lord's happiness." Xuan Huaifeng covered his face, glancing at his brother fiercely. He turned to look at Zhan Luzhao, but he was unusually gentle, and said, "This place is not good. Someone is chasing after him. Didn't you hear the gunshots just now?" Sure enough, there were gunshots, and he walked away with lust, and said in a deep voice, "Go." He bent over and grabbed Xuan Huaifeng. Xuan Huaifeng had been waiting for this moment. And when he bent over, he suddenly kicked Zhan Luzhao over on his chest, stood up and ran. After running a few steps, a gust of wind sounded behind him, and a heavy figure fell on him. The two immediately rolled in the shallow water, and the water splashed. Zhan Luzhao pressed him, twisted his right arm back, and said coldly, "You're still running?" Pulling him, forcing him to turn around and face him. Then he froze suddenly. Xuan Huaifeng held a Browning in his left hand, the dark muzzle was pressing against his chest. This Browning was placed on a stone by the river when he was washing his face with water just now. Xuan Huaifeng deliberately ran towards this side when he escaped, and was rushed over by Zhan Luzhao. Thanks to his quick movements, he took advantage of the situation and got a handful in his left hand. As soon as he turned around, he resisted Zhan Luzhao. Xuan Huaifeng ran closer, and when he saw this scene, he was so frightened that he lost his soul and cried out, "Second brother, don't kill him." Zhan Luzhao was only stunned for a moment. But he calmed down and said with a sneer, "Okay, I love this responsible appearance even more. If you have the guts, just hit it here. If I die at your hands, I will be happy to reveal Zhao. Go ahead, take a step forward." Xuan Huaifeng pulled the trigger without blinking. Xuan Huaifeng suddenly let out an earth-shattering scream and threw himself on Xuan Luzhao. But that browning only made a light click, and the expected bang and gunpowder disappeared. Xuan Huaifeng secretly said that it was not good, and his heart sank. Damn. No bullets at this time of death. Xuan Huaifeng held the pistol without bullets and took 2 steps back. At this time, Xuan Huaifeng had already rushed to Xuan Luzhao's side. Xuan Luzhao pushed him away, and rushed towards Xuan Huaifeng with a faster movement. As soon as he grabbed Xuan Huaifeng's wrist holding the gun, it turned violently. Xuan Huaifeng couldn't bear the force, and as it almost turned halfway, his whole body was overturned and hit the ground heavily. Before he could catch his breath, he was grabbed by the shoulders again and had to turn around, tilting his head back, showing Zhao's sharp eyes. Xuan Luzhao gritted his teeth and said, "Okay. You really want to kill me? Your heart is cruel enough." He raised his hand and slapped Xuan Huaifeng in the face. Xuan Huaifeng was beaten, his head suddenly tilted to one side. And he didn't feel the pain in his face for a while, but there was a buzzing sound in his right ear. Xuan Huaifeng came over and kicked his belly. Xuan Huaifeng groaned in pain and curled up. Xuan Huaifeng wanted to kick again, but Xuan Luzhao reached out to stop him. Xuan Huaifeng narrowed his eyes and said, "He's going to kill you." Xuan Luzhao also glared at him and growled, "Shut your dick. It's not your turn to hit you." A splash of water splashed on the ground. Xuan Luzhao shouted, "Sneak attack." Xuan Huaifeng fell to the ground at the same time. Several more bullets rustled from the direction of the forest. Xuan Huaifeng sipped and said, "Quickly retreat." As he said that, he crawled back with his head in his arms and retreated behind the big rock. However, Xuan Luzhao stepped forward to twist Xuan Huaifeng's collar. Xuan Huaifeng ignored the bullet and resisted Xuan Luzhao again in the knee-length water. Xuan Huaifeng was angry and jealous, shot a few shots into the woods, rushed out of hiding, grabbed Xuan Luzhao and shouted, "Do you want to die? Go!" Pulled back to the stone. Xuan Luzhao still didn't give up, and when he looked behind the stone, he saw that Xuan Huaifeng had already run a dozen paces in the opposite direction. He saw the prey in his hand slip away, and his eyes were red with anger. He took out his gun and shot back at Lin Zi fiercely, knocking out 2 people. He turned around and said viciously to Xuan Huaifeng, "You motherfucker. How come you were ambushed by someone else?" Not to be outdone, he replied, "I told you that the customs officer was here, and the woods were shooting. Didn't you fucking hear me?" Xuan Huaifeng slapped a few times, and slapped a few bullets on the stone where the 2 were hiding, and the splashed gravel made his cheeks hurt. Xuan Huaifeng said, "If you want to beat me, wait for your life to escape first." Xuan Luzhao said, "Go to the southeast." Bang Bang fired a burst of guns and rushed to the southeast in one breath.